Good afternoon. I'm Christine Eibs, and I am the co-founder and managing director of an organization called E+Co. And E+Co is a U.S. nonprofit organization that provides business development services and investment capital to clean energy businesses in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we founded E+Co back in 1994. So we're now a 17-year-old organization, and we founded it at a period of time when talking about energy for development was not common language. The linkages between energy and social and economic development, environment, was really not something that we had very many colleagues talking about with us. It was before the IPCC deliberation, so it was at a period of time where the concept of energy and climate really was not as commonsensical as we all know it is today. And it was certainly at a period of time when the concept of a small and medium enterprise as a vehicle for the delivery of energy services or as a vehicle of economic growth was really common knowledge either. And now there's a whole sector that's evolved around small and medium enterprises, impact investing, and so forth. So for the past 17 years, we've been on at times a rather lonely journey, but the journey is one of connecting the dots. And as AKN Reddy, or Amulya Reddy, who is no longer with us, but he was a founder of the International Energy Initiative, which is a newsletter some of you may be familiar with. He came from the state of Karnataka in India, and he basically described this as one of connecting the dots, that it's about technique as much as it is about technology. So when I was asked to come and speak with you today, and I looked at all of your CVs and saw the extensive, if you will, technical background that you all bring, I want to start this conversation by giving you my technology disclaimer. I am a technology neutralist. I don't come with a particular technology bent. I'm not an engineer. So when you ask me questions, please don't go down the engineering side of things or you'll get a deathly stare back at you. But I'm here to talk about how you take your interests in technology and how they get delivered to the field. What's the technique, the business technique, the software that goes along with the technologies that I know so many of you are involved in? So I also don't often use this title, but I am a doctor. I received a doctorate in humane letters from New Jersey State University last spring, so I feel that I have the ability to stand before you and lecture to such a distinguished crowd of scholars. Just a couple of more opening remarks, if I may, before I go and sit down to the presentation. I'd much prefer a podium and kind of stand and walk, but two things. One, you don't have one, and two, my feet hurt from being in grown-up shoes for the last couple of days. I'm a member of the Secretary General's high-level group on sustainable energy for all, and I was selected to that high-level group panel because of the information that we've gained over the years of working with well over 500 small and medium enterprises in the developing world. We've invested in 192 enterprises. We're also in a number of partnerships with IRENA, which is again part of how I've been invited to share our story and share some thoughts with you over the course of the next hour and a half. And that partnership with IRENA has two components. One component is in November of last year with IRENA, we hosted a workshop in southern India. Some of you may know, particularly if you're interested in solar home systems and the distribution of solar, you may be familiar with the company Cellco India. Well, with IRENA and Cellco India, as well as the Applied Materials Foundation and the Lemelson Foundation, we hosted a 7-day workshop in southern India with Cellco for 10 of our entrepreneurs from Tanzania, from Ghana, and from El Salvador. And we brought these entrepreneurs to southern India so that they could be exposed to what is often considered one of the world-class rural energy service companies, and exposed to them in the sense of what's their operating model, simple things like what accounting system do they use, what's their inventory controls, and then also more fundamental, and I'll get into this in the course of my presentation, what's their philosophy on customer service? Why are they so successful at connecting their products, their distribution with their customers? So that's partnership that we're doing with IRENA. The second partnership with IRENA is something which I'll talk about also, which is called the Energy Enterprise Portal. And that's, the good news I always like to say is E+Co's invested in 192 companies. The bad news is it's more than anyone else. And if you know the scale of the energy access problem, we certainly know that we need thousands of Cellcos, not just one. And there are more than one because there are other rural energy service companies. But we certainly need more intermediaries like E+Co, and we actually need thousands of business plans being produced annually that can receive investment and therefore deliver service. So with that, I'm going to take a seat, and please ask questions along the way. This is not intended just to be me talking. I have a lot of material to cover, but if the conversation gets rich, I'll fast forward through some of it and hit some of the highlights that I think is important. So with that, I thank you very much for having me here. Amanda Warren is here, who works with E+Co as our communications associate, so she may be talking to you along the way and asking some questions that we may be tweeting and blogging about as we go along. So thank you. Thank you to be here. Some of this is probably going to be known to you because as an IRENA scholar, you're very familiar with what's going on in the world of energy access and renewable energy. But let's start with the context. A third of the people in the world lack access to sustainable energy. I heard Jeremy Rifkin, some of you may know him, speak at the IRENA ministerial panel the other day, and he talked about 2/3 of the population of the world have access to a computer. 2.3 million people in the world have access to a computer. It just happens to be the same number of people who are still cooking with traditional fuels. So we have an energy access problem. Delivering improved energy is not a matter of just hardware technology development. We have the technology today. It's not a question of new technology. The energy poor don't have to wait. We can always improve the efficiency and the cost effectiveness, but the reality is we have technology today that can meet the needs of the energy poor. In our opinion, it's a matter of creating successful channels of distribution for a known set of variables and to do so at an effective and efficient scale. That really does make this an engineering problem, though of a different type than generally thought and that many of you may study. Using technologies, products, and the experience of various enterprises that I will introduce, I would like us to first look at the core challenges that must be addressed to reach the energy poor, all of the energy poor, because the last 10% will be the toughest to access. After reviewing these experiences, I'd like to suggest to you a series of frameworks that can be employed to design projects, programs, and policies that will likely have a higher probability of success and sustainability than many of the ad hoc approaches that we generally employ. And then finally, what I'd like to do is review with you a work in progress, which is the Energy Enterprise Portal, that is aimed at taking the learning of the last 2 decades and converting this to an approach to reach tens of millions of households on a regular basis. I want to start with a summary of what I hope you're going to take away from the course of our dialogue, which is that innovation is implementation, that the outcome from success is huge, that the problem is not as intractable as it seems, that there's a wealth of experience, and that the opportunity to address energy access and the energy poor is large and now. The problem of energy access cannot be looked at as one of just providing more kilowatt hours and units of heat. Energy access has enormous social dimensions that goes beyond supply and demand. What we've done here is we've just put up there 7 of the Millennium Development Goals. And it's fascinating that it wasn't until actually this year that the issue of energy was actually linked officially within the United Nations system to the Millennium Development Goals. But the reality is none of the Millennium Development Goals are achievable without energy. Energy is a means to an end. No one wants energy just because they want a kilowatt hour in their hand. They want energy because it's leading them to something else. Basic energy services are generally thought of as the 2 bottom rungs on the energy ladder. The first rung is small amounts of lighting, electricity, and heat. The second rung expands on the quantities available and adds small amounts of power for productive use, such as water pumping. And certainly a lot of the focus within our dialogue is how do we get productive use when we talk about energy access? How do we actually lead to income generation opportunities? For E+Co's purposes, when we think about these problems, we think about the cost being somewhere between $250 and $1,000 per household to solve. But we need to solve that problem 400 to 500 million times. So I'm going to introduce you now to some of the entrepreneurs who are steps along the way to solving these problems. As mentioned, we have a partnership with Cellco. And the reason that we have a partnership is that we invested in Cellco in 1995 as their first equity player. That's Harish Hande on the left. He's the founder of Cellco India. And on the right are a few of their more than 100,000 customers. These happen to be street vendors for whom Cellco developed a solar charged battery system where in essence on a micro enterprise basis they're charging the solar lanterns, leasing them to the street vendors, and then allowing those vendors to spending less money on kerosene, having better quality light, and attracting more customers to their product. One of the things that's great about Cellco, as I'd mentioned, is they're very much interested in their customer focus. So they go out and they look at the demands. What does the customer demand in an energy product? And then working with their team, they actually take the technology and design the product as well as the business delivery model to reach that. Harish and his team represent a firmly established model in the area of rural energy service companies. And he tailors his products to the customers at the bottom rungs of the economic ladder. What he illustrates and his team illustrates is that scale can be achieved as well as profitability by a company that's serving the poor. One of the myths that Cellco has shattered along with companies like Grameen Shakti is the myth that the poor can't pay. One of the things they've demonstrated is that a big issue there is access to finance. If you can bring the right financial product to your customer can afford an array of solar products or systems in the area. Cellco's shown the importance of developing products for the market and the huge possibilities when the energy enterprise links with credit. Another area that Cellco has been groundbreaking in is in making strong institutional linkages with the Self-Employed Women's Association. And of course, India has a very vibrant and healthy network of microfinance institutions. And Cellco has worked very hard to relate their product to the products of the microfinance institutions, and therefore the offering to customers and a deeper penetration into the marketplace. This is Clara. We're now in Ghana. We're shifting continents. And Clara is the proprietor of a company called M38. 38 for the age of she was when she started the company, and M for her last name. And what Clara took advantage of is she realized that there was an opportunity in her neighborhood for the delivery of LPG cylinders. That the people in her neighborhood did not have the ability on a regular basis to take their cylinders to the local filling station. So she was actually working at a bank at the time, and she tried to access capital to begin to implement this business model. She had a business plan. She had some good financial skills. She couldn't access local capital. So she came to E+Co. We gave her some guidance on the shaping of her business plan, and then we provided a first $50,000 loan to Clara to enable her to purchase her first inventory of cylinders. And she began a door-to-door delivery service where she would go pick up the cylinders, she would drive them to the filling station, and she began to create this business. She's now borrowed well over $200,000 from E+Co, and included in that was a small filling station that enabled her to have more control over the supply of LPG. What this experience exposed is the myth that you need a track record and a collateral to create a vibrant enterprise. In Clara's case, we like to say that she had the very old definition of luck, which is when preparation meets opportunity. Lest you think that in our work of enterprises and energy access, we only focus on decentralized technology, I wanted to take you to Honduras. Because Honduras is an example where three things came together: the entrepreneur or the enterprise, the policy framework, because in the case of Honduras, they had a very favorable policy regime towards small-scale hydroelectric, and finance. So you had technology, finance, enterprise, policy regime that all came together to allow this project to move forward. The problem was when this entrepreneur first approached us, the finance wasn't in place. He came to us with a phased approach. This is now a 13.5 megawatt hydroelectric project that's displacing diesel, directly displacing diesel in Honduras, because most of the electricity system in Honduras is powered by diesel barges that sit offshore. So this entrepreneur came to us and said he needed $200,000 to implement the first phase of what would be a 13.5 megawatt project. It happened to be about a 400 kilowatt first phase, and none of the local financial institutions would touch it because it was so small, first-time entrepreneur, small scale. They didn't see the vision of the phasing of this particular project. Fast forward, we've now received an 18% return on investment on what turned out to be a $1.5 million investment by E+Co into this enterprise. This enterprise actually was the first small-scale hydro project under the Clean Development Mechanism, and so took advantage of the carbon finance opportunities from offsetting diesel. And this entrepreneur is now going off and creating his next series of small-scale hydro projects in Honduras. He's also in the lower corner, you see there, he's also instituted a local reforestation program. So he's employed local women, local individuals to actually work on the reforestation of the area surrounding the plant. And he's also created his own local microfinance operation for his employees. So in this instance, it's a good indication. It's not just when we talk about energy in the enterprise model, it's not just at the decentralized rural area, but also at the grid-connected base. And it talks, when we get into the framework, it talks a little bit about what has to be in place for these things to happen. Shifting continents again, it's another example in Cambodia. This is a company called SMERE, which stands for Small Medium Enterprise Renewable Energy, not too creative in the branding. But what this company does is they've imported small-scale biomass systems from India, and they're working with rice mills, local rice mills, where they're taking the agricultural waste and converting it into electricity, where they're decreasing their operating costs by about 45% by displacing diesel fuel. And I believe the numbers are they're displacing about 65% of the diesel usage in their generation system. We made an equity investment into the company to start up their operations, and then we've actually put in place a line of working capital, about $2.5 million, that has enabled them to roll out about 28 different installations, targeting rural industries, primarily rice mills, because we're using the agricultural waste as the fuel source. And this is an example of a multiplier. We went into one particular entity, and that entity then distributed, as I said, 28 now on their own, probably over 40 different rural energy enterprises through the use of the association and working with the rice mills. So here you've seen a number of different technologies and different feedstocks already that exist in our portfolio. And that's one of the things when you think about an investor, we're not just staying in one particular technology, one particular country. We take a portfolio approach to our investment opportunities. This is what I would say is one of our rock stars in our portfolio. This up in the right-hand corner in the blue, well, I guess your left-hand corner is Siraj Wahab. We're in Ghana, and this is a fuel-efficient cook stove company. And in this instance, what they're doing is they're actually manufacturing first from scrap steel the outsides of the fuel-efficient cook stoves using ceramic liners and selling them into the market. Now you might say, okay, what's so exciting about that? Well, there's a couple of things that's exciting. The first is that this grew out of an aid project. Canadian Care had come in and trained about 165 artisans in the shaping of those ceramic liners. And then, like all projects do, it ended. And you had 165 trained artisans, and you had this really excited entrepreneur amongst those artisans. And so he went around looking for capital, trying to find some investment to start making these cook stoves on a more regular basis. And no one would fund him. He went to the local bank. No one would fund him. He tried the friend and family route in Ghana, which is, you know, the angel capital. That was a little hard for him. So he found us, or I think we found each other almost simultaneously, and we provided a first loan of $70,000 that enabled him to basically get, as working capital, put in place the supplies that he needed to begin manufacturing. And what he did is he went out and he found some of those other 164 artisans who had been trained, and he's now created a business that's delivering 140,000 fuel-efficient cook stoves into the marketplace. Each one of those cook stoves reduces the charcoal use by about 45%. So we're having a significant decrease in both the fuel that's being used and, of course, because it is more efficient, in the emissions that are being produced. And E+Co has been working with him to package his carbon offsets, and we're selling those carbon offsets to Goldman Sachs. So on an annual basis, he's earning about $750,000 directly from Goldman Sachs for the carbon that he's offsetting through the voluntary market, through the gold standard market. So here's a situation where we came in, we provided him business guidance and assistance, we provided him working capital. We've now invested over $500,000 into this particular company, and he is poised to scale into Burkina Faso and into Togo. And those projects will actually be registered under the clean development mechanism for carbon. Of course, carbon isn't as exciting as it was a year or so ago in terms of the prices, but in terms of a model, it shows how there are different forms of finance that you can bring into play. Quickly, another example of solar. We've jumped again down to Tanzania, and this is a project whereby the entrepreneur came to us, and again, what did he need? He needed some guidance on his business planning. What's the fundamentals and the finance inputs necessary? What do you need to understand in terms of your market? And we provided a first loan of $50,000. Often $50,000 was the magic number in these instances because that's about what it costs to import your first container load of solar photovoltaic panels. And that's really what a lot of these entrepreneurs need to get started. They need to have the equipment. They need to get out there and start dealing with their customers. So in this particular case, this is up in the Mwanza area of Tanzania, so it's up in the north. And we've now invested about $300,000 with this entrepreneur as well. And he is now a viable, growing business, no longer needing E+Co's participation. We also packaged on a voluntary basis about 12,000 tons of carbon from this particular project as well on a voluntary basis. And we've sold that carbon to Kleiner Perkins. So for those of you who know the venture capital space, it's a very successful investor. And they basically have bought this as gifts for their various guests in their business. They give them gifts of carbon offsets from Tanzania. If you're interested in these different types of models, I mean, E+Co certainly is not the only investor in this space, but I encourage you to visit the ashton.org website. 5 E+Co companies are actually have won the Ashton Award, and they just give you a really good example of what these business models are, what some of their opportunities are in the marketplace, and there's probably about 70 or so enterprises that are actually profiled on the Ashton site. So if this is something that's interesting from how technology meets delivery, I encourage you to visit this particular site to learn more. This is Bolivia. We began work since we didn't really talk too much other than Honduras about grid extensions, what I'd like to do is give you an example that shows you the benefit of a grid extension and shows that enterprises and implementation comes in a number of different forms and shapes. This was actually a fuel substitution project in Bolivia, where Bolivian brick makers, if you can believe this, they use dirty and dangerous fuel to fire their red bricks, which is a mixture of sawdust and lubricated fuel oil. And if you can imagine the indoor air pollution and the respiratory diseases that fuel mixture causes when you're in close proximity to the smoke. We worked with Red Ceramics, which was a local brick manufacturing association, to switch to natural gas to power their brick ovens. We assisted the association in gaining their land rights, because that was something they did not have access to, and without land rights they couldn't go to a local financial institution and seek any financing. We then loaned them $70,000 for the extension of a natural gas pipeline directly to the kilns, which was up in the mountains out of La Paz. They now displace on an annual basis 12,000 tons of firewood and 360,000 liters of used lubricated oil annually. Despite a landslide, and you can kind of see in the picture they're built up in the mountains, this loan has been fully repaid, and this is a vibrant operating association business that now owns their land and is able to secure financing from the local banks with which they work. So this is a different example of an enterprise which is actually an association as opposed to an entrepreneur and a business model. Let's talk to the statement of the energy problem. What we need to do is we need to move energy supply, energy distribution, energy efficiency, and the individual technologies out of their respective silos. And we need to convert an enormous amount of energy waste in the system and the enormous amount of energy poverty globally into successful businesses. That's what this discussion is all about today, is how do we create these businesses. We need to spend more time on the implementation of models that work and less time seeking silver bullets. We often talk about scale, and scale over the last 3 days in the Secretary General's high-level group is a word that is almost gets to be like nails on a chalkboard. Everybody wants to scale, scale. And often we seem to think that it's one particular program, one particular technology, one particular approach. And as we talk over the next bit, I want you to think about scale being a series of interventions along a continuum. So for example, in the country of Tanzania, we've invested in about 16 different solar photovoltaic companies along the continuum of delivery, from importation of product all the way down to local, rural, remote distributors. That's scale. If you can get that whole supply chain of 16, 17, or 18 different companies working, over time you might have consolidation, but when you start, you have scale along a horizontal continuum. So I'd like you just to think about the supply chain side. Technosol in Nicaragua, rural energy service company. Clean Thai in Thailand is a cassava waste to energy project that's now fully commercial, and was again one of the first CDM projects in Thailand, where they're displacing about 800,000 liters of diesel oil a year. I'm not certainly going to go through all 9 of these different categories. A colleague of mine developed this typology because these are generally the types of enterprises that we think about. And you can see, again, with your interest, there's a number of different technologies that exist today amongst these typologies, and ones that certainly will be developed and improved over time. But in essence, each of these has to be adapted to local market realities, and what I want you to realize, and as I'm sure you do from all the different nationalities and markets represented in this room, all development is local. So each one of these technologies, each one of these business models must be adapted to the local context in which you're delivering the energy, good, or service, and the customers that you're hoping are going to buy that energy, good, or service. And this, obviously, presentation will be available for you later, so you can drill into all these. This goes way past the standard 6-word by 6-line PowerPoint presentation standard. But this is just from where we sit, the kinds of things we're looking at when we talk about these different models, or we assess them as potential business investment opportunities. E+Co doesn't usually talk too much about the IEA, but in this particular instance, what we wanted to show is from a renewable energy viewpoint, this is what the IEA specifies as the barriers to renewable energy success. And they're significant. We all know that. And the reason we want to put this slide up there is if this is what the barriers are in terms of renewable energy in general, I can guarantee you that this is why everyone thinks attacking the energy poverty issue is so difficult. If we're talking about these at a more national level or a regional level, when you get down to that local context again, each one of these gets more challenging, and each one of these actually gets more individualistic in how you must address them and deal with them. So I don't put, you are all in this world of renewable energy technology, so this is probably not all new to you and not to scare you, but these are what challenge make the energy access challenge even more difficult when you talk about sustainable energy access. I have just spent, as I mentioned, the last 2 days in the Secretary General's high-level group, and clearly one of the main deliverables from the Secretary General's mandate of the Year of Sustainable Energy for All is universal energy access by 2030. From where we sit in our experience over the last 17 years, when we talk about energy access or alleviating energy poverty, this is the pushback we get. There's a technology shortage. I'm not going to read them to you, you can all read them, but this is what we get. And so the questions that we often throw back is there really a technology shortage? So that something needs to be invented or adapted greatly in order to serve the vast number of people who are currently without energy? We don't think so. Is there really a policy shortage so that decision makers don't know what to do? So they don't know how to apply smart subsidies to the truly poorest of the poor or how to stimulate economic activity? Not true. Are there support programs unproved? Look at some of the World Bank experience in different markets. UNDP. Is the market too weak? Cellco India, Grameen Shakti has shown that the poor can pay for energy services. Poor can't or won't pay. Same issue. Is the market too weak? Is there no enterprises? Is there no customer demand? Is there an entrepreneur shortage? There's entrepreneurs everywhere. Who would have thought Clara Mankata was an entrepreneur when she was working in her bank? What they need is access to services and capital. Is there capacity building not understood? When you look at the different development programs out there, again from the World Bank or UNDP, some of what Irina is doing in terms of capacity building, we understand it, we just haven't applied it. Is there a capital shortage? One of my favorite quotes from the Rockefeller Foundation. Impact investing, investing in enterprises. This isn't about money, this is about deal flow. There's no capital shortage. Goes back to the before, there's an entrepreneur shortage because we need to create deal flow with the talented men and women who live in these locales. And then lastly, are new mechanisms and tools needed? We think there's a wealth of experience out there, and what I challenge you as you go forward, and we'll talk about, is we think it's as simple as connecting the dots. There's experience out there, and we need to take what we've learned over these years from E+Co's and others, connect the dots, and create the pool of entrepreneurs for investment capital and technology linkages. Okay, now I'm going to, these next couple of slides get a little messy, so bear with me a little bit. I want to propose for you that 3 frameworks: a macro framework, a meso framework, and a micro framework. The macro framework is at the policy level, which identifies 3 legs of a triangle that each must be strong, grounded in the local context. The access framework, which identifies 5 success factors that need to be managed and strongly connected. And then lastly, the last mile, or micro framework, which defines 8 variables that if we manage them well and we interconnect them, we have a greater likelihood of success. So I have to acknowledge that this is the first time that I'm actually working through this, so if I sound on this particular piece of the framework, bear with me and ask questions and push back, because it would be good to have your feedback as I go through it. And you'll see why it's a lot to take advantage of. Each of these squiggles represents an impact from what happens if you improve energy access. Less drudgery for women and children, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, less indoor air pollution, income generating, lighting for studying or income generation, access to information, communication, and technology. When we increase the quantity and the quality of energy, we get better energy access. And the truth is, we don't really care about clean, modern energy access for its own sake. Going back to how we started, it really is, what do we do with the energy that we receive? And so the task is to take all of the tools at our disposal to capture the impacts so that the benefits become tangible to the users, to the entrepreneurs, and to the investors. The impacts are fluid and elusive. Think about herding cats by yourself. We have to bring all of these pieces together. And history has shown that approach is neither holistic nor based on incremental trial and error. We have to, it's really the laws of the, this is where my handwriting at 1 o'clock in the morning is getting a little bit crazy. But let's go to the next slide and I'll show you what I mean. I talked about this before, how we have to have policy, technology, and enterprise. How these things are defined really influences the success of what we're doing in the marketplace. All three must come together in order to complete the triangle. Where am I? I'm sorry, guys. These notes are a little out of whack. I'm sorry about that. Let's go to here. If there's too much emphasis on the technology and too little attention to the policy environment and the entrepreneur delivery, we can't capture the impact. Oh, man. See, my problem is, if I may just show you guys why I look like I don't know what I'm doing up here, is I have the words, but they're not going with the picture of the slide. So that's why I'm a little bit off my game here. Here in the triangle, the policy affects how the business gets a loan. The technology is what we're bringing into the marketplace, and if the policy affects, we get the loan, the trade. If we're talking about the technology coming in, if someone just comes in and dumps technology into the marketplace. Think about, we've had examples where we've created businesses, for example, in Morocco. We created a business, and then one of the bilateral programs actually came in and dumped technology into the marketplace. The entrepreneur was unable to survive. He could not create the demand locally, because why should customers pay for it when 2 or 3 villages over a development program has come in and given the product away? So we have to, in that instance, we have to have the technology that's working. We have to have the policy environment that's conducive to what we're thinking about. And then we have to have the enterprise and access to finance. And because my notes are not numbered, as you had suggested, I'm going to skate ahead to where I know. In fact, that way we'll have some, we're going to go to the meso framework. That was my colleague, my co-founder, Phil Larocco's activity program that he implements. He delivers that lecture at Columbia, and I actually have not delivered it before, so I apologize that I was testing it out on you and hadn't had the chance to practice it fully. So my apologies, and this part I can talk about very well because this is all about E+Co's enterprises. So let's go here. This is the meso framework. The delivery of modern energy requires that the customers and the enterprises are working in tandem. And we've seen in our experience that there are 5 really main areas that have to come together. And if there's a lot of imbalance or one of them is out of whack, the likelihood of our enterprise succeeding is actually quite diminished. We have to have a robust enterprise-customer interaction. The enterprise has to understand what the customer is looking for. The customer needs to know that the enterprise exists, that there's a technology that can meet their needs, and that there's a price point that they can afford. So that becomes a very important dynamic. And I'm sure many of you are saying, but of course, that's common sense. The reality is, in a lot of the developing world markets that we work in, it's not as commonsensical. So the enterprise and the customer are 2 links that go together. This is what's required for this linkage to be successful. We have to have the entrepreneur, they have to have the technology, the entrepreneur needs to be able to deliver the services, whether it's maintenance or repairs, to the customer, and of course they have to have finance. On the customer side, they need to demand the product. Do they have a particular need of the energy service that this enterprise is actually offering? Do they have the knowledge of the technology and of the enterprise? Do they understand what services can be provided to help them use the technology more appropriately? And can they access finance to be able to access the technology? This is a very critical one, and when people say, why has E+Co been successful over the years, it very much has to do with the entrepreneur or the champion. You need an entrepreneur, or a man or a woman, who understands their market, has some basic skills, is willing, the word that we use is EDSable. They have to be able to receive business development services and want to grow and learn. And lastly, just like if you were in the venture capital business, they have to have skin in the game. It has to be important enough to them financially, psychologically, and spiritually that they're not just going to walk away from the enterprise that you're working with. So having a champion, and this is the case whether it's a hydroelectric developer or a rural energy entrepreneur, you have to have a man or a woman who is dedicated to that particular activity. The technology has to be appropriate. Again, we're neutral in the technology. Our screening is it needs to be appropriate to the demands of the marketplace. It needs to be available. We always say we're not taking any technology risk. We have enough risk already. We want a technology that we know is working. And then lastly, it needs to be affordable. And across our experience base, we've worked with many different technologies as indicated there. And back to that model slide, across very many different models. What types of services does the entrepreneur need? Business development, feasibility studies, legal, brokering services, the carbon finance assistance, technical advising. There's a series of services that these businessmen and women have to have access to. And this is the case again, whether they're in the venture capital model or you're in the rural energy service area. We need to be able to provide services. The enterprise has to access them. Then of course finance. All of this is moot if the entrepreneur can't receive the finance that's necessary. And it comes in many different colors. We have debt, equity, subsidies. Smart subsidies are appropriate in many of these markets, whether it's for the entrepreneur himself in the form of the kind of capacity building that he might get, or ultimately subsidies to the end user, as in a first cost subsidy for a person who's looking to use LPG. Often the cost of the cylinder or the stove is prohibitive to the uptake of that particular technology base. On the customer side, what's the demand? Do they know about the products? What's the income generation? What are the cost saving or health opportunities, etc. So we have to understand the customer demand. The knowledge base. Is the customer aware that this technology even exists for them? It's more than just marketing in terms of the enterprise itself, but it's again that connecting with the customer. And this is where Cellco India has done such an amazing job. One quick example, because I think examples are more interesting than just me spouting off of the slide, is Cellco was working with a group of silkworm harvesters. And what they realized is they harvest the silkworm in the evening, but they were using kerosene lanterns. And the smoke from the kerosene lanterns were actually affecting the quality of the silk that was being woven by the worms and harvested. So the Cellco team put together, very simply, the miner's caps, which were solar-powered miner's caps. But what that also, it helped the silkworm harvesters, but what it also did is it created a micro-entrepreneur who charged the lamps by day and leased them out to the silkworm workers in the evening. So we created a business, we released the kerosene from the silkworm harvesters, improving their own indoor air and producing a better quality product. So there was a win-win situation all around by knowing what the customer needed. Finance. Biggest issue in our marketplace is how do we provide access to finance for customers? How do we engage microfinance institutions or provide capital to the particular enterprises themselves to finance the customer base? We call this the spider chart. And what happens when these things aren't in place is that the whole enterprise can actually collapse. If you pull out any of these particular components, if you don't have an informed customer, if you don't understand your customer's demand, if you aren't able to service the product, whether it's SME renewable energy, who can't go out and service the rice mills who are utilizing the biomass turbines, if it's solar, if it's our Honduran entrepreneur who can't actually service and maintain the hydro component, you're not producing the power, you're not producing the income, and the whole chain falls apart. And this is what it looks like when it all works together. You have your policy and enabling environments, you have your technology, your finance, and then of course for E+Co, as for others, we're producing that triple bottom line of finance, social, and environmental benefits. So, how about if I take a pause and see at this point, before I go on, are there particular questions or things that you'd like me to talk about? The next piece that I'm actually going to go over is what we've learned and the project we're working on with IRENA, which we call the Energy Enterprise Portal. Are any of the examples that I've given relevant to the types of technologies or work that you are studying or that you're doing, you're working on in terms of your own interests? Can someone give me an example of something they're working on that relates to this particular business model, or where they see a linkage between the service delivery model and what you're interested in?
The projects which you have shown, actually, it's in the two remote areas. So how did those persons approach you? Like, your company is back in US, so how did they approach you?
Well, we actually have offices in 6 developing country locations. So we have men and women who work in the field, who understand the local markets. We've been in many of these markets for 10 years or so, so we have a reputation in the marketplace. But we also do something, we host market opening workshops. So our investment officers, and often our entrepreneurs themselves, will go into the local markets, for example in Cambodia, and make a presentation on the particular business model. And we do that for 2 reasons. Our entrepreneurs get customers, and we find new entrepreneurs. So it's partially by doing market opening, word of mouth reputation. We work with local financial institutions so they come to us. But another way to think about it is most of the entrepreneurs we work with, even the ones who go out into the rural, remote areas, are actually entrepreneurs who are based in the capital city. Often they are based there, that's where they start, and they move out in terms of their service delivery as they get their enterprise model off the ground. Please.
You have just presented to us the success stories. I'd like to know about also the failures.
Oh yes, we have failures.
And in your experience, what do you think are some of the main things to watch out for? Your experience about those failures.
I'll give you back to my crazy triangle that I didn't do such a good job with on the presentation. One of our companies that failed is in Ghana. It was an energy efficiency company, and it was implementing a particular power factor correction technology and delivery. And they changed the policy. The government changed the energy efficiency policy and how companies were being incentivized to save, and there was no market for the company anymore. So there was a policy change. The company was unable to sell their product to some larger industrial players, and as a result of that, they failed. They couldn't pay us back, and they couldn't proceed as a business. So that's one particular failure. Other failures are because the entrepreneur wasn't the champion that we thought he or she would be. They just didn't have the ability. I'll give another example, and I don't mean for these all to be African examples. It's just the ones that are coming to mind. I'll give you an Asia one in a moment. This particular company, he imported a container load. We supported him to import a container load of compact fluorescent lighting in Uganda. We had a market, we had an understanding, we had a price point, we knew the customer base, but he got a very lucrative contract from the World Bank to do some consulting. And it was easier. Being an entrepreneur is really hard. The margins are slim. These are not your kinds of businesses that are going to turn, your double-digit revenues on an annual basis. It's a hard business. It was a more lucrative business for him. The company failed. We had the container of CFLs as collateral, so we were able to take that and work with another entrepreneur, but there was a failure. Another instance is in fuel-efficient cook stoves in Zambia. This is probably back about 10 years ago, before cooking actually became as important as a sector as it is now, now being focused on. And in that instance, we had a great engineer who had fabricated and designed and assembled, manufacturing a really good quality cook stove, but he couldn't market it for anything. He just didn't have any of those skills. And despite our engagement with him and helping him try to find someone from the marketplace who was a good marketer, good salesperson, couldn't get the business off the ground. It failed. In other instances, we've had a particular project in Asia where we feel we didn't give them enough business development services. They were limping along. We had a change in staff, so there was not continuity in the investment officer that was on the ground. Project got ahead of itself. Expenses got ahead of what the revenue stream was. Company failed, and it's a write-off. So they're all along the way. We had, in some markets, the local finance hasn't come in. The end user finance hasn't come in, so the market hasn't grown as well. So I would say those are particular examples. It's not specific to a particular technology, but we've felt it on the policy side, on the finance side, excuse me, and on the entrepreneur side. Please.
An entrepreneur comes to you with an idea. What are the points you look at so that you decide to invest in that particular idea?
We actually, if you went back to, I know it sounds simplistic, but if you went back to that spider diagram, we really look through all of those, because as we're doing our enterprise development services and working with the entrepreneur, we're actually doing due diligence along those different points. How strong is the entrepreneur and his team, his or her team? What are the services or skills that they need to move along? We call that our number one risk mitigation strategy. Of course, we look at the finances. What's the financial expertise that the entrepreneur brings, and what's their own investment that they're able to bring? What's the customer market? What's the price point of a particular product? And that price point is as important with a small-scale hydroelectric project, what's the utility going to pay, as it is how much is the cook stove or the solar home system. What are they using now? Are customers using kerosene? Are they using diesel? What's the price point that we play?
Surveys are done by you, or do you rely on the data provided by the entrepreneur?
We vet the data provided by the entrepreneurs. Often we direct them to places to gather that information. In a particular country, we'll have resources with the different economic entities or other NGOs who are working. So we'll direct our entrepreneurs to that source of information, and then we vet that information. We're actually vetting the market opportunities there. So I would say the things that we're no different in E+Co's history, we're really no different than a regular investor. We're just actually able to take higher risk. That's the mission of our company, so we're willing to take that risk. It's why we have public capital to go in and basically prove out that market. But we're really looking all along that spider chain, what's going on with policy, finance, technology, customer demand information, and of course the real linchpin is that entrepreneur. Please.
An extension to this question, you mentioned about you checking the strength of the team. What if a person is having a strong idea, but he doesn't have a team or something like that, but you want to implement the idea? So how do you go about checking the validity of the idea? That's the one question. You mentioned lots of projects successful in many areas. So have you ever tried to make it large to a large scale, like contacting the governments and make, for example, the solar one in India, trying to contact the local government agencies and make it a big scale, spanning more markets?
Okay, let me come back to the first question. We often advise the entrepreneur that you need a particular skill set amongst your management team. Often part of the investment that we've provided has been to put that management team in place. Or through the E+Co Enterprise Development Services, through our investment officers, for a period of time, we don't actually join a company like a venture capital would, but we would provide that particular service or that particular skill set to move the entrepreneur along. But if we can't get confidence that the skill sets are there or are going to be there, we won't make the investment. So we need to ensure we'll work with the entrepreneur, we'll guide them, we'll connect them with different services, but you do need to have that full set of skills, all those tools in the toolkit before we'll actually make an investment. And we also know that's what regular investors are going to be looking for. And part of our thesis is we use our capital to go in and help these entrepreneurs prove their business model, and they need to be able to get past us to more traditional business as usual finance. Because ultimately that's the capital in the marketplace we have to unleash. We have to get local financial institutions, traditional finance products to come into this marketplace. Now to come to your scale issue, for many years the expression we used is we've operated under the radar screen, because frankly not in all instances is government and large programs helpful when you're trying to prove out a particular business model or a pilot or proof of concept of a particular rural energy service intervention. Clearly in the case of a hydroelectric project where you're talking about having a power purchase agreement, that's different. But in terms of the rural programs, and growth is absolutely what we want. We've taken an approach that scale for our enterprises is the approach that we use is replication. So by bringing different entrepreneurs together, peer-to-peer learning, we're looking to replicate successful business models as opposed to taking one particular entrepreneur and scaling them up. And partially it's capacity, and it's also been the finance that's have been available in the marketplace. So those have been two constraints: capacity of that particular enterprise and of finance. And recall, these aren't technology companies, so this isn't where you're going to be able to just take where a company is in bringing forth a technology, looking for finance, and then can really, if you will, explode in growth, exponentially growth. This is really more much measured growth in terms of service. So when we talk about hitting, millions of people served, our concept of hitting millions of people served is through hundreds and then thousands of enterprises. That's the actual replication model we see. Okay, anybody need to stand up? I needed to stand up. Did anybody else need to stand up? All right, so let me come back. Let me just talk about the message and the strategy. We basically focus on three things: electricity, cooking, and power. There's no one size fits all, but there's lots of elements of the different business models that can be replicated. When we think about a household and we think about basic energy services and opportunity, we're talking about $250 to $1,000 per household. That's both for basic services and the beginning of some productive use. We see 5 last mile approaches, and I'm talking this way because I want to go into the program we're doing with Irina. Cash and credit, pay as you go, a partial subsidy and a full subsidy, or in essence a giveaway. And then we talk about the flexible and the last mile enterprise form, because they all require different things, these businesses and their entrepreneurs. It's information, capacity building, access to product, and then the two biggest things that E+Co has focused on is access to enterprise finance and access to customer finance. When we think about scaling E+Co, because scaling E+Co is part of the way you address the universal energy access. You get more entrepreneurs out there, you get more capital, because remember we do services, capital, entrepreneur development, finance. We think the finance part of the equation is going to happen. There's going to be more funds developed, there's going to be a more innovation around how you blend public and private capital, and we'll play a role in that. But what we've focused on, again, is that pipeline. We'll call that comment from the Rockefeller Foundation. This isn't about money. This is about deal flow. So we realized that if you're really going to put out thousands of business plans for finance to be brought to, we need to do 3 things. We need a multiplier of products and services. We need a learning platform for the actual preparation of entrepreneur business plans. And then we need to match those business plans with finance in terms of a finance network. So we're advancing, with support from Irina and others, a 3-platform integrated strategy to increase the scale of entrepreneurs for finance. We want to serve 400 million households. When I say we, I mean the sector wants to serve 400 million households. And we think that, based on our experience and that of others, that it requires 80,000 last mile enterprises that are either separate, such as I've talked about in Tanzania, or part of larger chains and networks, franchises, and they're going to be both public and private. The target of the Secretary General's mission is to eliminate energy poverty in 20 years by 2030, and we have as a goal to create 4,000 enterprises per year to meet that, to be part of the solution of energy access. The problem has been, to date, and E+Co is an example, we've only done 192, still more than anyone else, but only 192, is that process has been very high touch. Very, if you will think about it from a scale viewpoint, very inefficient and very expensive. So this is an approach to try to tackle that and hit universal energy access. So this is the business model. We want to create a marketplace that brings together product, finance, and entrepreneurs. It's a combination of distance learning, of peer-to-peer learning, such as I explained in southern India, and of local regional hubs that do mentoring. We see as a couple of problems in this process of scaling. We've talked a lot about the entrepreneur. The other piece is, how does the entrepreneur get to the product? What is the right product? What is the right technology? How do we aggregate the purchases of those technologies so economies of scale benefit not just the enterprise but also the customer? How do we ensure that the right finance is coming into this, that we're taking, if you will, the colors of money, where there's low-cost debt, where there's equity, where there may be some subsidy? How do we blend those together and ensure that our entrepreneurs are having access to that and that the money is having access to the deal flow? So we see an opportunity to have a web-based market where you're connecting these entrepreneurs and their business plans with a supply chain manager that's worrying about inventory and transportation, and then with a financial markets manager who is actually making the connections between the money that wants to be invested and those that need it. We see a very significant opportunity here because you've got the information and communications technologies. We're not really inventing something new. What we're inventing is the coming together of these three pieces targeted specifically on the last mile energy access issue. It's all about connectivity, and we want to use this as a means by which we improve payment systems, particularly mobile banking. There's two very interesting prototype programs out there right now using mobile banking as a means by which end users can purchase energy on a day-to-day or hour-to-hour basis. There's a pilot in India, a company called Simpa that's actually piloting with Cellco India, where, and this is where I have to do my technology disclaimer again, they've got a chip into the actual lantern and solar home system itself. It's linked to the mobile phone, which is through the mobile banking system. And one of the comments that Harish Hande is well known for saying is many households in India can afford a rupee a day for electricity, but they can't afford 30 rupees a month. They go by a day-to-day basis depending on what their ability to pay is. With this new system by Simpa, and I encourage you to look up the company Simpa, S-I-M-P-A, they're doing a lot, even though they're a private company, they're doing a lot of this open source, sharing their information. Basically, this is an opportunity where if you can afford 2 rupees today, you can buy 2 rupees worth of power today. You get it right off of your bank account on your mobile banking. If you can't, the system shuts off and you can purchase it 2 days later when you can afford it. So it really is an ability to pay as you go and what you can afford. And we're going to try to take advantage of that mobile banking as we scale up this particular enterprise approach. We see that there's 3 stages of enterprise learning. The learning leads with connections to finance and product. We're going to look at free information and tools as a means by which to bring in the entrepreneurs. If you think of how do we attract it, social media, market opening workshops, working with local NGOs, really getting the word out as to these opportunities to bring in the entrepreneurs. We would then have a period of self-administrated program of study, and then mentored learning and enterprise planning. So if you think about a funnel, we would actually have an entrepreneur, potential aspirational entrepreneurs come in, go through a period of self-screening, and then when they reach a point of actually needing a mentor, that's where there would be an actual enrollment and fee-based program, whether they were tuitions from different development finance institutions or government bodies, or the entrepreneur actually making that financial commitment themselves to go through the course of study. They'd be assigned a mentor and they'd be assigned an inspirational entrepreneur. We've had many of our own entrepreneurs indicate their willingness to participate as mentors and as advisors to entrepreneurs who are coming through. And again, experience from seeing all of our entrepreneurs together, that's a very powerful tool for growth and replication. And this mentored learning and planning, the goal is again to matchmake with products and finance. This just gives you a sense of how we see the actual flow, the funnel actually working, where we have an intake, information, self-study, leading to investments. We see this as potentially a tool at the institutional level as well. We've done a lot of speaking over the last couple of days in the working groups for the Secretary General's high-level group, that there's a lot of capacity building that's necessary at the institutional level, at the Ministry of Energies, at the Ministries of Finance, within local financial institutions. One of the biggest barriers has nothing to do with energy. It just has to do with how local banks deal with small and medium enterprises. They don't have the regulatory framework or the business infrastructure to actually respond to a small business. The fact that they're delivering rural energy services is really not the problem. It's how do you work with local businesses. So part of what we've been talking about with some of our partners is how this information comes and informs local financial institutions, government officials, policy makers on what's necessary to scale energy access through local businesses. Again, here's what our targets were. I jumped ahead of myself. It's entrepreneurs and champions, it's public sector, civil society, and then it's the professional and financial institutions, particularly at the government level. We do see opportunities in here to partner with local universities. In many of our markets, there are social enterprise or enterprise development programs within the university structures. We want to partner with those programs as well, and hopefully some of them will be actually partners in the regional hubs where the mentors will be located. Just the content of what we see as necessary for our entrepreneurs. If you think about distance learning, as you think about the different pieces we've learned that they have to go through, this is what we see as the opportunity for the content of the learning platform. And a lot of this work is already underway, and we could share, if you're interested, some of the modules that we've put online. Obviously, as you all know, there's many different learning modalities, and we intend to incorporate all of them into this because there'll be structured classroom instruction, field visits, peer-to-peer, virtual mentoring, and then direct mentoring, one-on-one mentoring between local professionals and our aspirational entrepreneurs. This just goes a little bit more detail into what we think the learning platform should be. The reality is it's multiple learning approaches. Entrepreneurs in different markets with different business models and technologies need to learn differently. And our goal is to incorporate that through partnerships, through the distance learning activities. One of the things we realize and why we're pleased to be working with Irina and others is we know that this is much bigger than E+Co. If you're talking about 4,000 entrepreneurs a year, what we have is an understanding of how you create that particular energy business model. We have to partner with others who understand about reaching out, pulling in new, using social media more aggressively, pulling in technology platforms, pulling in those that have really piloted and professionalized mentor programs because we want to engage with local mentors. How do you structure those? What are the training programs for mentors? So while you're probably saying there, but you haven't done all this, E+Co hasn't done all this, how are you going to achieve it? We're going to achieve it by taking our core competency, which is understanding enterprise and energy enterprise business models, and building out a value chain of partnerships that enable this to go into a more virtual and distance learning environment. And in summary, really what we wanted to leave with you, what I wanted to leave with you, is that part of when you think about technology, you also need to think about technique, and that really being a successful implementer does require innovation, that they're really innovation and implementation is one and the same. The ability to have success is huge. We have to have success. I mean, we really have to make this universal energy access a reality, not just for development, but also for environment. The problem isn't as large as it seems. When you talk about households, when you talk about people, when you talk about 1.6 billion people who need to be served, it's a very daunting number. When you break that down into 400 million households, it doesn't sound so bad. And then when you talk about 4,000 entrepreneurs a year, it even sounds a little bit more manageable. It's not a problem that can't be solved. We've got the technologies, we've got the techniques, we need to do some connecting of the dots. There's experience, and as the Secretary General said this morning, as he said with us over the course of the past 2 days, we really don't have an option. Solving this problem of energy access and dealing with the climate is something we have to do. It's our obligation for the next generation, for your generation, and your children's generation. We have to address the problem. So with that, I thank you for your patience as I stumbled through that particular part of my presentation. I apologize for not being particularly ready for it. It's not a reflection on how important this was. It was a bit of a time crunch, but I apologize. I thank you for your patience, and I'd be very pleased to either provide you more information or to answer any additional questions. Any thoughts, any questions? Please.
E+Co is a non-profit organization.
Yes.
So what's the source of your finance?
We blend public and private capital, so we have grant monies that enables us to actually do the enterprise development services, grants or contracts from different public organizations. We manage a lot of money for development finance institutions. So for example, we manage funds from the International Finance Corporation, from the lending arms of many of the European governments. And then we have about $6 million or so of private capital, so capital that we've borrowed at non-market rates. So our cost of capital is about 4%. So we've borrowed from high net worth individuals or social investors, both in the United States and Europe. And that's the capital that we use for investment, and then we use the grant funds or donations or contract funds to support the enterprise development services. If you think about our model, we really are a 3% model. If someone, we always hope this, if someone were to give us $100 million, we could run this company, even $50 million, we could run this company at 3%. But the challenge is, just like our entrepreneurs, it's getting that working capital up front to provide those enterprise development services, to de-risk the investments, and then provide the investment capital. So that's our challenge as an organization, is raising that upfront capital to provide those enterprise development services. Yes?
You say you have partners in 6 countries?
Yes. We have a small office in China. We're in Thailand, Tanzania, Ghana, Costa Rica. We have a small office in South Africa, and then we have our, if you will, our marketing administrative offices in Amsterdam in the United States.
So how exactly do you have, invest in people who are actually not living in any of these countries?
We travel, and if you look at how we've got a very concentrated portfolio of companies in Tanzania and Ghana, where our offices are located. Right. We have a smaller number of enterprise investments in Uganda, so we do, we're close, but we have to travel. In Thailand, it's very easy to get around. We're in the Philippines and Cambodia. Cambodia is a day trip away. We have the office in China, and most of our investments are in Honduras and Nicaragua, so we manage those from San Jose.
So personally, I'm from Bangladesh, and it's a small country with 160 million people. So there are actually a lot of development going on.
Yes.
Particularly in the field of this solar power.
Yes.
There are a lot of remote areas. And I believe there are actually a lot of scopes. People they actually want to do stuff, but they don't have money to do stuff. So they're looking for, people who can fund them actually.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can pass this information to people.
We actually don't invest in Bangladesh for the reason you mentioned, which is we don't have an office there. We don't actually have the physical presence. But there is a lot of capital that's looking to make its way in to Bangladesh. So let's share that information. We've worked a great deal with Grameen Shakti over the years. So we know their model very well. In fact, we were one of their first supporters back in 1996 and helped in some of the original shaping of their model. It's a great model. There's a lot of learning from there.
So you have actually planned to go there?
I'm sorry?
Do you have some plan to go?
No, we do not. We don't. But there's a lot of interest that I am aware of in terms of the financing side. Please.
Do you have any distance learning or workshop programs for students?
For students, no, we do not. Only students who want to be entrepreneurs. Oh, you mean from an entrepreneur viewpoint? Yes, we do. I can give you some linkages to that. In fact, if you go onto our website under resources, there's 2 toolkits up there that are they're not distance learning, they're actual toolkits that we've used over the years that are very successful and actually are forming, if you will, the basis for this learning platform. One is called the Africa Rural Energy Enterprise Development Toolkit, and it's basically a step-by-step means by which you create a business plan. The other is called the Practitioner's Guide to Technology Transfer, and it was something we prepared for the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. They use that to actually train their own professionals in how to think about proposal writing and business plan preparation. So there are two documents that give you a really good guide about business planning and the different data points and analyses that need to be done.
Do you provide any support on the preservation of intellectual properties if there is need?
We actually haven't ever faced that issue because we don't deal with technology per se, and every entrepreneur thinks their business model is particularly unique. So we've had entrepreneurs ask the question, but we've never had to face that issue. The question was, do we provide any assistance or guidance on intellectual property? And it's actually not something we've had to address. Well, yes, please.
Would you be having any sort of program which would give us like access to all of the examples that you brought forward, or perhaps we could intern with some of the enterprises that are already out there to get a feel of what it is?
Great question. We certainly do have internships, and most of them, though, have been directly with E+Co in our local with our investment staff as opposed to our entrepreneurs. One of the things we're developing is if you will, a business extension program to work with our entrepreneurs, because we realize that there is a lot of business expertise that they can benefit from. We're probably 6 months away from being able to have that kind of real conversation about going and working with an entrepreneur. In terms of these case studies and all, our website has a great deal of information on the particular investments themselves. You can go in, there are videos. We have some detailed, if you will, lengthy case studies. There's case studies obviously on Cellco that have been done by, the most recent one was a Yale case study that really drills down in and goes to some of the lessons learned that we had and some of the, if you will, the failures that Cellco has faced over the years. So I would refer you to the website and some of the case studies that are up there. There's also a case study on E+Co up on the website as well that was done for, I actually wrote with some support, that was presented in the the MIT Social Innovation Journal back in September. Please.
Do you have any examples from this part of the world, from the Middle East?
No, we haven't invested here. In fact, we haven't come here yet. We're hoping to, with support from Masdar and others. We've had some conversations, but we haven't actually jumped into the market yet. Great. Very good. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I will, Hugo, actually, Irina has my contact information. I can certainly provide some business cards. I want to thank you for your interest. I know this topic is perhaps a little bit off from what you may normally hear from your lectures, but I hope you found it interesting and certainly in terms of understanding how the technologies are actually applied on the ground. And I'd welcome any further follow-up or questions that you might have. So thank you for this opportunity, and I wish you all well and enjoy this wonderful summit. Thank you.